Delighted to have a wonderful guest on this month's Talk with Sally, Jo Wallace. Jo, I've been looking forward to speaking to you. I've been a huge fan of yours for many years. I've spoken at your event, Good Girls Eat Dinner, and it just felt right that I would invite you to be one of my guests. So thank you so much. Would you like just to give a bit of an introduction about who you are, where you work, and then we can kick into this fantastic conversation?
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm also looking forward to this chat. So yeah, as you said, my name is Jo Wallace and I'm an Executive Creative Director at Media.Monks. And as you mentioned, I also am the founder and host of Good Girls Eat Dinner, which is a non-profit sort of supper club / networking event that I founded 7 years ago.
Yeah, anyone listening or watching, highly recommend these events. They're just inspiring, absolutely inspiring. So thank you for running them. I know they're a lot of work as well. So at the moment, it's fair to say that the world is certainly far from stable, and especially around leadership. And in agency leadership, I've been saying to lots of my clients, it's okay to have found things tough. I think people have just forgotten COVID to deal with the next crisis. But let's be honest, it's been a really tough few years, and it's looking like a tough year next year. What do you see are the main struggles out there that people are coping with, given everything that's going on in change? And then what's your advice on how to really get around it? A small question to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes me think about, the kind of memes that go round. And I saw one just the other day that someone shared with me, and it was an image of Winnie the Pooh with like a blanket over his head. And it said, clocking in at my dumb little job and sending my stupid little emails. And it's obviously a comment on the fact that it's really hard to kind of put your work and what's going on in the world together. And as you said, it is very normal for us to feel quite overwhelmed at this point in time.
Yeah,
and
it is.
Then again, it's kind of surreal that you log on to your job and you work these long hours and you're doing things that, yeah, they're great, but they're not going to kind of necessarily impact on the shit show that's going on in the world. So it can feel quite at odds with one another. It's true, we're definitely living in uncertain times, and not just in this country, but globally. The first thing that leaders can do is to recognize and acknowledge that, and have some genuine understanding and compassion for how colleagues might be impacted by various things. Like just recently we had the US Supreme Court's rollback Roe versus Wade, and that had a ripple effect on so many people, and particularly women. It felt like our rights and our choice over our own body had literally been taken back 50 years. It does become quite difficult to then log on and just carry on.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was obviously at Media.Monks by that point, and it was really great to hear kind of management speak out about that, and to go on to Slack, and the Slack group that you're part of is talking about it, and there's an outlet there, and there's support there, and there's actions that are being kind of put forward as well.
As you're highlighting, there's some really big issues that are impacting on our world, to put it mildly. And then you've got the cost of living, you've got the energy crisis, people are worried, people are stressed. What's your advice as that agency leader, a senior agency leader globally, that leaders can do just to not feel too overwhelmed, to kind of keep that commitment, keep that confidence, and keep the focus, so they're helping their teams and their businesses really well?
Yeah, I think in simple terms, it's recognizing that people are humans, and we've gone through a time, in the post-pandemic world, that work has become even more 24/7 than ever before. And we see these headlines, recession looming, etc. And it kind of puts people in a headset of, oh no, I don't want to be the one that's let go. So you kind of find people being really worried and working even harder, and that in itself is quite concerning. So I think it's that fact that people aren't robots, and there's this need to be human with people and empathetic, and clear. So even just as a company, you know, being clear about what might be on the horizon, how we are going to deal with this. Bad leadership is lip service and lies, and good leadership is treating people like human beings and ensuring that they're supported. I mean, I hear a lot about burnout right now, and I think it's a very real threat.
Yeah, it is. I think your point there that ironically, people thinking we've had a lot more flexibility, which we have in many ways through COVID, changing the ways of work. Equally, it's brought this other level of never off pressure. And you don't have your routines of the commute to build up or build down from work. And the pressure now of, if I, will I get made redundant? So I better show a bit more presenteeism. I think that was an unexpected negative factor of the ways of working being blown up, that people felt they just had to show up in whatever capacity online.
Yeah.
Now, in all of that, especially your role as a global ECD, it's keeping people creative. It's keeping the work relevant and meaningful and cut through in a world that's already terribly noisy and perhaps more cynical than ever before about the role of creativity, advertising, comms, digital, that whole kind of piece. What's your advice for creative leaders, especially, to help them keep that creative quality relevant and great in all the disruption, all the kind of difficulties, but also if a company's thinking, gosh, we're just going to have to make a creative pivot, like now is the time to do things differently, yet we've got workforce that are burnt out, we've got leaders that have been relentlessly managing change. It's a hard ask. It's a hard ask in normal times, but even more now. So what would your advice be around keeping creativity really effective and supported, and then on a wider piece, the creative pivot?
I think it's a really easy, and I'll use the word mistake, and then I'll quantify that, to remove advertising or marketing spend, because, as the cost of living squeezes everyone and we have this kind of looming recession, I think it's quite tempting for brands to look at their marketing budget and think, well, there's an easy cut to make.
Yes.
But history's proven that while cutting marketing budgets during recession can offer short-term relief, it can adversely affect a business and its value in the longer term. And I think in the 1980s recession, there's a fact about the fact that businesses who were aggressive about building their brand through advertising grew 275% more than those who didn't.
Amazing. Gosh.
Which kind of shows, and I think, I'll be really honest, I don't genuinely go around thinking that advertising affects me. I don't think any of us do. We all like to think that, that just affects everyone else, and I'm not, somebody that advertising works on. But I think that alone shows that it's a subconscious thing. It's something that we don't necessarily believe is gonna, I'm not going to watch this ad and then go and buy that thing. But there's still this reality of your brand having presence and your brand having a voice in the world, and that mattering to people. Media.Monks is a new model that is very much built around being efficient and nimble and collaborative, and we're geared up to move at the speed of digital. And within that space, we can refine campaigns. And even once they've gone live, we've got this constant feedback loop between creative data, measurement and development in order to tweak an experience live. So I think it's really important for brands to have the right partner. And then within agencies, ensuring that people can remain creative. Simple things like hearing each other and trying to have a sense of humor as we go forward. I think we're living in a very unfun world in many ways. And personally, one thing I at least want to try to do is have some fun with my team.
Good. Music to my ears. Music to my ears.
Because if you aren't having fun, then you're definitely not going to be creating the best work. I work with teams all over the world, and obviously I'm not going to be there in person with all of my teams all of the time. But if there can at least be some human interactions, some, jokes that are made, the Slack channel, as much as it can be a real impactful sort of distractor, it can also be a space where you can have a lot of fun.
How do you keep creative? How do you ensure that you've got those resources to then go on and inspire your global teams?
Well, I have always tried to stay relevant in terms of knowing what's going on. So that's not just kind of reading across the news, so I know what's going on in the world, but also, what's going on in pop culture. I'm also fortunate that my wife is 10 years younger and she works in social media. So we are obviously always talking about various things that are happening. Lead by example, but also get out of the way. I've got immensely talented people around me, and I do not want to be that kind of micromanager leader at all. So I'm there 100% in support, but I want them to shine. I want them to feel that they can absolutely fly. My understanding of the world and references that they are going to potentially pull in really speeds up that ability to kind of support, understand, move it forwards. My job is obviously to direct the ideas into a better space and to hold that conversation with clients and have their kind of trust to move forward. So you need to kind of know what's going on, I think. And I have encountered situations where if a leader doesn't really know what's going on, it kind of shows. I kind of might have an inkling of something, but my colleague really understands it. So I find that really brilliant. I want them to be an expert. I want them to step forward and kind of fly with a project. And I see it as my responsibility to empower them to do that.
The ad industry, the creative industry, is also a real dinosaur in its own right when it comes to ageism. Mm-hmm. And there's a thing around, well, how do you keep relevant as you get older? And it's saying, well, actually, if you can bring that in partnership with different perspectives, that's an amazing asset, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there seems a bit of a way of thinking in our industry, and it's a brutal industry, isn't it? Let's be honest as well, for hours and just the pressures. However, it seems that we're hopefully starting to open the lid on, just because you hit a certain age, especially as a female, why does that mean you're now obsolete? Why does that mean you suddenly lost the ability to communicate or be creative? And there's some horrific statistics around just how many women aren't in leadership roles, in general, but specifically in leadership of creative departments. I think, is it 17%?
I think it's around 17% female creative directors, yeah.
Which is, given how many women are out there in the world, and often it's the women who are the consumers anyway, even from a pure business perspective, that's like, hang on, that doesn't marry up.
Yeah.
And is that kind of one of the reasons that inspired you to start Good Girls Eat Dinner? And was it that real, from your view of coming up through the ranks, seeing the lack of role models, how did that influence your personal career and then bringing about this wonderful community, which is Good Girls Eat Dinner?
I mean, I personally never had a female creative leader, and that's a very common story across the board. And not to say that I didn't have incredible male leaders that I learned a lot of, I learned tons from them, but I think it was difficult to be sure of how to model myself because I'd only really had male leaders, and it took a while to sort of be comfortable in my own style. Good Girls Eat Dinner came about because I was asked, ironically or not, I suppose, to give a talk about being a female creative leader because it was relatively rare. And I thought, well, I'm going to be speaking to the converted here. So I decided, to cut a long story short, to do an exhibition instead of female creativity, which went way beyond advertising. So it was an art exhibition essentially that had 20 amazing women exhibit, from Alison Jackson to Pam Glue, all sorts of amazing talents that crossed the sort of spectrum of art to directing to sculpture. And it was called There's a Good Girl. That was in 2014, the end of 2014. It was when I was at Saatchi & Saatchi. And I saw with my own eyes the reception to that, particularly amongst women. And I'd had an idea in my mind for a while of wanting to do this kind of networking / very non-worky, casual, social supper club And seeing the response to the exhibition, I was like, right, I'm going to do it. So I called it Good Girls Eat Dinner because the exhibition was called There's a Good Girl. And the exhibition was named after a book by a lady called Marianne Grabrücker. And she had written a book about bringing her daughter up in a gender neutral way. So she'd given us the permission to use that name of There's a Good Girl for the exhibition. And I just kind of like made it have a similar feel by calling it Good Girls Eat Dinner. Yeah, it's just a space really that I wanted to showcase female role models, like make them more visible, give access to them and allow everyone to come together, mostly women attend, to sort of feel this power of when a woman is successful and when we have a space to really be ourselves, it's magical. Like the vibe in the events is just insanely positive. And
it is.
Yeah, and the feedback has always been so wonderful to hear. You know, like I've had people write to me and say, I was on the verge of doing my own business and I came to Good Girls Eat Dinner and I then did it and I've never looked back. And just, you know, it's not just even about the speakers, it's about who you end up sitting next to and who you might chat to during the event. So yeah, it's been a fantastic 7 years. I can't believe I've been doing it for 7 years.
And what would your advice then be to other leaders listening to this, regardless of gender, but if they're running a team, creative or not, but how can they be making sure they're building the right diverse succession plan? Because that 17% is shocking. It's not just around gender, it's all the different representatives that we want in a leadership team. What practical action can the leaders, the people who have power at the end of the day, take to make sure they're bringing up a right generation under their leadership that is going to change those statistics and actually get people into those top leadership roles?
Yeah, and there's lots of talk about the kind of desire to change this, but I see very little action. And if I'm honest, it frustrates me in the traditional agencies. I mean, less so at Media.Monks. I find it is a very diverse company, to be honest. But I think traditional agencies still have this real homogenous type of person in leadership and throughout the agency. And as much as you can try to bring in different types of people, if you don't have the culture there for them to thrive and you don't have the support there for them to thrive, then they're only going to kind of be a bit of a blip and then leave, because why would you stay if you don't feel welcome and you don't feel that it's the place for you? So I think, I mean, I've got to be honest, I think it's super simple, but yet it seems impossible. You've just got to hire a diverse group of people and make a culture that they feel welcome. And it sounds so easy to say, and yet it just doesn't seem to be happening in traditional agencies.
Yeah, it mirrors my belief that it's doing the simple things well. When I come in working with leaders, often the reason they're not thriving more, because they're all thriving already. All my leaders are like, you know, high performers already, but everybody's got stuff. And it's not about looking for the bodies, it's looking about excelling and growth. But the reason they're often not quite firing on the levels they want to, or they're just dealing with too much stuff, it's because the simple things have been missed out, like a job description that's actually effective and motivating and support. And so it's like, hang on, we could get really, you know, wound up about all this extra, you know, what's leadership like in the difficult world, and well, hang on, have you got a job spec? Like, do you know what your actual job is? And I think what you're saying really mirrors that. It's, well, are you just doing it? And rather than talking about it and grandiosing about it, if you start to actually just do the simple things better, like recruit well, give good reviews. I think that's shocking. You know, the thing, there's a real kind of acceptance in the creative agency land that reviews are a bit of a pain, both as the receiver and as the giver. But if you're not reviewing people well, how are you knowing if it's working for them or not? It's how are you retaining your workforce? So I completely back you on saying, let's just get the simple things happening. And that's what's going to drive great change, isn't it? Small incremental steps that work rather than a massive thought that just fizzles out because no one's got the time. So last two questions of our chat, please. One thing I'd love to know is, You and I have had the pleasure of connecting in a leadership mentoring capacity, slightly different to the norm, which was wonderful. But leaders often are lonely, even though to the outside world, they're shiny, they're successful, they've got so much going on in their life that's great and people aspire to. But you peel back the layers, as I said, the reality is it can be overwhelming, it can be difficult, people are feeling burnt out because they're human too. Back to your previous point, like everyone is human. What difference did it make to you getting support from someone like my role? And what advice would you give to other leaders to make sure they're getting support to excel?
We've obviously always been in touch over the years, seen each other at various events. And then when you spoke at Good Girls Eat Dinner, you very generously offered to give me a session to sort of just, I think at that point I hadn't quite started at Media.Monks, and
no.
It was a brilliant kind of moment to just check in, reset, or to at least kind of look at it from a different perspective and have the opportunity to consider things like how you do want to move forwards and what it does mean for you at this point in time and where you would like to be in the future. So, I mean, I definitely recommend speaking to you. And I think I also naturally love reading books about kind of psychology and how the brain works and how you can kind of attempt at least to better yourself. A lot of leaders probably naturally do that anyway, but it's something that I personally find really helpful.
Just also being open, like you said, being open to going, oh, maybe this person's got something different to offer me.
Yeah.
And let's explore.
Mm-hmm.
I think often when people start and they realize, oh, it's good.
Yeah.
It works. So last question. We've talked at the beginning of our call around next year is going to be an interesting year. I think we could also, we're at danger of all talking ourselves into, let's just
like
have a duvet year, let alone a duvet day. That's sabbatical. But it's not, there's also opportunity. Whenever there's difficulty, there's huge opportunity. Like you said, if you don't cut your advertising spend, if you don't cut your leadership development, if you don't suddenly make mass redundancies, if you set your ship up to sail well, you can come out the other side brilliantly. What leadership traits specifically, say the three to five top leadership traits that in the current climate, you, Jo, either will be personally really focusing on as a leader, or you just think this is also what other leaders should be really thinking, these are the leadership traits that will set you up to succeed, to excel, no matter what the market conditions?
I mean, before I kind of get into the specifics, I think I just want to mention that I have noticed, and I'm sure you have, that there's been this kind of clear shift in perception around what makes a good leader in recent times. And there used to be this kind of perception that, these quite kind of showy, brash, very confident people made amazing leaders. And then we saw what happened with Trump and Boris, and we realized that maybe we'd prefer a competent leader than someone who's a TV star kind of thing. And I was reading something the other day where it was talking about confidence and competence only overlapped by, I think, 9%, which is quite astounding that you've got only 9% of that confidence is actually competence. And I think it's interesting how there's sort of a heroing now of the smartest person in the room is often the quietest. And for me, that's like music to my ears, because I'm not someone that in a meeting will like try to hear my own voice loads. I want to hear what other people are saying. I want to find out the lay of the land. And then I think I'm best placed to make a difference in terms of like the 5 things that a creative leader would need or want going forwards. And I'm just thinking about what mine would be. Obviously creativity, obviously bravery. I think empathy is a huge one in so many ways. Resilience, and a final one would be competence. I mean, you've got to actually be good at what you're doing.
Yes, it helps, doesn't it? As you're saying, like we thought a certain leadership style was the best or the only one, but there's no room for error now. I think people quickly see if someone doesn't have a grasp on their leadership and what they're there to achieve. You know, you can't bravado in a climate like this. A positive about a climate like this is that you see the true whites of people's eyes, don't you?
Yeah.
You know, you see the true self in how people cope with real difficulty and uncertainty.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Here's to this conversation inspiring people to do things differently, to check in on their competence and get some support, because everyone needs help with competence. It's not, you know, you're only born to a certain level. I always say, look, elite athletes are only elite because they've got a team around them making them so. So happy to hear you're loving your new chapter, and wish you all the success with everything that comes with, you know, embracing new and doing things differently. And thank you so much for being my guest. I've loved our conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you.